But one of my most favourite things in the whole world is to make men feel uncomfortable by saying I've got my period. Like if they say, what's wrong with you? I'll go, ladies things. And then they just go, whoa. So it's good to talk about periods.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about today.
Do you know, David's the same. I mean, I think David's really like forward thinking. You know, he's very kind of, he puts up with me, so he has to be kind of, he's open-minded, he's really good to talk to, but the minute I say period, he's like, oh, don't want to know. His worst thing is, he's like, why do they have to use the words heavy flow? Like, it just makes him cringe.
You just have to hear the words, we have to go through it.
I use the word leaking.
Leaking? Okay, you're leaking today.
So Maria,
Do you leak?
you're the hormone coach?
Hormone Health Coach.
Hormone
yes.
Health Coach.
Yes. So that's just my social media name.
The Hormone Health Coach
Yes.
on Instagram
And Facebook, yeah.
Okay.
So basically, Cate, I'm a therapist. I do Chinese medicine, which is the acupuncture and the Chinese herbs. And then I also do something called the Orvigo Maya massage. And 10 years now, and I was working with women coming in to me in their mid to late 30s that were having difficulty getting pregnant. And when I was doing the consult, I was like, did you ever have period pain or period troubles? They're like, oh yes, when I was a teenager, but they had never been addressed. And then I would say to people, oh no, your period shouldn't have been painful. That's a sign there's something wrong. And the shock.
I feel shocked.
Mm-hmm. I know.
I thought, well, I've been very lucky. I don't really have sort of painful periods, and did when I was sort of in my teens for a while. Then it was okay. But I know so many people who have suffered, like friends of mine who've just been doubled over, had to miss days of school or whatever at the time.
Yeah.
But I thought it was just the way it was.
Yeah, you see, do you think, Maria, because so many people suffer from period pain or whatever, that it's just seen as the norm, so put up and shut up?
Well, yes, there is that aspect of it, but also we just don't talk about periods enough. Okay. And I'm doing my best now to educate, and hopefully the next generation of men, they're young boys now, they won't react like your men did, and they'll be, oh right, how is your period? You know they're not meant to be painful.
Yes, but also the next generation of women maybe will go, well, yes, it's not meant to be this sore.
Yes, hopefully it'll all have been addressed in their teenage years. So basically, what was happening were women, yes, so back to where we've got this from, it was just, we don't talk about periods a lot. And if you suffered, probably our mothers, if they suffered, they kept it to themselves, because who were they going to? They certainly weren't going to mention their periods.
Yeah, because what do you say to your GP? Oh, of period pain? They're like, well, take a painkiller.
But also then I remember, my mum was quite open talking to me about periods, but I do remember when I was 10 or 11, and this was back in the 80s, like she did tell me, you know, it might be sore. You might be one of the ones that gets really sore periods, or you might be one of the lucky ones. And that then is the standard that we base it off. Like, I guarantee if we went out to the streets and picked up young teen or preteen girls that haven't had their periods yet and asked them to describe them or tell us what they know about them, they would all mention the pain aspect and the suffering, and it's a curse, and it would all be very negative. Mm-hmm. Because it's just...
That's what we've all been kind of led to believe.
Society, yeah. So then what happens is a woman's teenage daughter is having period pains, and there's a good chance the mum will go, well, here's a hot water bottle, and she'll nurture her and look after her, and she'll kind of go, well, that's kind of the way it is.
Part and parcel.
You just have to get used to it.
Yeah. And then what maybe the next stage is, if it does get really bad and we go take the daughter to the GP, well then there's a good chance that the GP will say, well, that's just how it is for some women. Mm-hmm. And she might grow out of it. Or other stories I've heard, and this is where my Instagram then came about, because it was driving me mad, the stories. I was here and I was going, I have to educate. So some of the things were like, oh, she's only imagining it. You do not imagine lying on the bathroom floor, vomiting and bleeding and rolling around in pain. That is not in your head, and that is how bad some women or some young girls have it.
And just or putting you on the pill.
That's the next thing is it wouldn't have happened in our age. At our times, they wouldn't have put us on the pill. Maybe just quite as young, in the 80s. Whereas certainly now, the pill, and there's no explanation. This is a contraception that has a lot of risk.
Hormones.
Yeah, and it's just treated like it's a medicine. And it's not a medicine, and I am very aware, very respectful that as individuals our lives are all very different, and what suits me might not suit somebody else, and we have to be very mindful of that. But I am a big believer in informed choice, not just choosing what suits you, but having the information around that. And these young girls, if it is believed that they have pain, then they are 9 times out of 10 told, oh, the pill will stop the period pain, it will bring back your periods, it will regulate your periods, and it does none of the above. What it does is just stops ovulation, which means it stops the menstrual cycle.
Stops the cycle,
yeah. So you're not actually having a true period. You only have a true period after you ovulate. Okay. We can talk about ovulation later because it is the most important thing, or one of the most important things a woman's body does. So if you're not ovulating, which you don't if you're on hormonal contraception, then you're not having a real period. You will have depending on what kind of hormone you're using, you might have a breakthrough period if it's a progesterone-only pill, or if you are on an estrogenic one and you take the 7-day break, then because you've stopped the synthetic hormones, you will get a withdrawal bleed. And the belief now has come out in the last year or two that was something to do with the Catholic Church, that they wanted maybe women, it was to keep the Catholic Church happy that women still had periods when they were on it, or maybe then there's this story that it made women still feel like women because they were still having a bleed.
Yeah, so there's no benefit on the pill. There's no benefit to having the bleed. Is that what you're saying?
No medical benefit to having the bleed, or no known medical benefit. So loads of people then were coming into me and I would say, did you ever have period pain? Well, yeah. Well, except now, when I was on the pill, my periods were fine. And I'm like, no, but you weren't having a period when you were on the pill. And then I'd talk them through and explain it.
Because you weren't ovulating. And so.
And then they were like, I did not know. And I'm going, did the person that prescribed it to you not tell you this? So what?
Nothing's explained.
No, it's not. And do you know how I explain it now? It would be like if I went home to my house and I was turning light switch. When I touched the light switch, I got a shock. So I call an electrician and I say, I've got an electrical fault. And he comes to me and he's all, Maria, you're right, you do have an electrical fault. So I'm going to disconnect your house from the mains. And well, then that does solve the problem. I will no longer get a shock from the light switches, but my house isn't going to be functioning properly. And that is just what I feel hormonal contraception does. It is disconnecting the woman from her menstrual cycle. It's stopping her menstrual cycle, and whilst life goes on as normal, the functionality underlying isn't there.
Right, which then leads us on to, because that is a big reason why I was on the pill, as I've shared with you before, Maria, was because my natural cycle was so hard. Like I was obviously, PMS, PMDD, really, so I'm like, I need a break from this. So naturally or unnaturally, I don't know, naturally, without, like, I came off the pill last year, and after a couple of months, like, I just felt really rotten for a couple of weeks coming up to my period. So I went on the pill. So it's a bit like sticking a plaster.
Yeah.
Not actually getting to the root of
it can serve its purpose. If somebody is in a really bad place, and we do have like a sticky plaster, it's the same with antidepressants and all of these things, we are lucky to have access to them, and sometimes they're needed in the short term, but Ciara, it's more the long term.
Well, this is really what I've been discovering this year is, even like I was on antidepressants for a long time, and it's only from being off them I went, they didn't actually solve the problem. They just kind of numbs me a bit. So yes, it wasn't as bad.
Yeah.
You know, on my really bad days, but then they kind of numb me on my good days too. So and it didn't make me better. You know, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's not a need for them sometimes, but I was on them long term, and it's only now I'm off them I'm going, it didn't make me better. So it's the same with the pill.
Yeah.
It's not really sorting the problem out. It's just kind of stopping you ovulating, so you're not going through them big cycles as much. So now we want to talk about, well, what kind of things do you recommend we do so that our cycle isn't as bad as what it can be? What would you recommend?
First of all, what we have to say, because there will be some people listening or watching to this going, I really don't care. You know, they don't. Some women are like, I'm in so much pill. Why would I care? And so, just so that these people can have that little bit more information about why they should care, we should ovulate every 4 weeks approximately. You ovulate 2 weeks prior to your bleed. So, and like, why would you want to ovulate if you're not having a baby?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's another big cracker we get from the doctor. Don't worry about it unless you're having a baby. Can you imagine a man going in with erectile dysfunction being told, are you trying for a baby? No, don't worry about it. Come back when you want to have a baby and we'll deal with that. It just wouldn't happen. So back to ovulation. Ovulation is how we produce estrogen. I'll skip the details of it, right? But just trust me, in the ovary we produce estrogen around coming up to ovulation, around the time of ovulation. But what else? Yes, it prepares the lining of the womb. It gives us the fertile mucus, and it matures the follicle, which contains the egg. But it's also of benefit for our hearts, preventative cardiovascular disease. It's important for our metabolism. It is important for our bone density. It's important for our mental health.
So we don't have estrogen then if you're not ovulating?
Very little. Well, you have a synthetic form, which it cannot be having the same impact on the body, because if it was exactly the same as the natural form, then we would ovulate.
Okay, yes, of course, yes.
You know, so, and we know this because as soon as a woman hits the menopause, you need estrogen. You need it for your heart, you need it for your bones, your collagen, your skin. And I am sitting back going, how come estrogen is really important at this stage? But all through her fertile years, it wasn't mentioned and it wasn't important, and we kind of stopped her producing
forgot
it.
about it a bit.
And then then the next aspect is once you have progesterone, so the follicle, the follicle the egg bursts out of the follicle, and the follicle becomes the corpus luteum, which then produces the progesterone.
Okay.
So progesterone is what we need for, we also need it for metabolic purposes. It's also a natural anti-anxiety. It's a calming hormone. So again, it has uses outside of pregnancy as well. So that's one reason why we might want to have our cycle, just so that we are producing our hormones naturally. And the other thing is that our menstrual cycle can be used as a gauge for our overall health. So if there's someone like me, I have a healthy cycle, very predictable, and there's no issues. But if there was, say next month, and I realize I ovulate maybe 4 days late, or maybe I don't ovulate, or I ovulate 6 days early, I'm like, why is that happening?
Okay.
How do you know?
How do you know when you ovulate?
See, I used to have a theory years and years ago that I could tell when I ovulated, but I might have been imagining it. I just kind of every so often, I would just kind of be like, oh, is this just me?
I've heard
like
some people
sort of
say
a flourish. Sort of like
what do
within
you
me.
mean? A flourish?
Just kind of
This
like
is so beautiful, Kate. You're on my wavelength.
I feel all biz all of a sudden.
Oh,
Really?
That's the estrogen and testosterone.
Is that it? Mm. No, this would have been like way back when I was in university. I remember there was a fella I was really good friends with. And I remember saying to him, I think I just ovulated. And he would be like,
really?
Oh.
But how do you know? How did you put that feeling with that? Had you read it somewhere?
It must have just
Had
like
you
once a
watched
month
it?
I would feel there was something that just kind of like, it's sort of like a feeling of, ta-da.
I'm alive.
And I'm like, and it just would be like that, and then go, and then Yeah.
Like a momentary
Just
thing?
like just kind of like almost like if you take a drink of like a fizzy drink and it goes up your nose a wee bit, just kind of like like that kind of a bubbliness.
So not
or
like a
something.
day thing.
Is this?
You like it's just
That must have been the pop.
Yeah, maybe. I was just kind of like,
And did you notice there were loads of men cracking onto you that time?
Yes,
Those
actually,
nights?
that's what I was about
Yeah.
to say. Then I remember kind of like occasionally I would be in work or whatever. This is back when I worked in Chicago Pizza Pie Factory, and I was 21, and all men would be chatting to me one day, and then you would kind of like nothing, couldn't get a dog to bark at me, and then all of a sudden men are kind of flocking around again.
popped your egg and they
were
all
like,
around you.
They don't want you when you they don't want you when you've no eggs.
no.
And yet at the same time they were horrified if they found out. They're like, she's ovulating, that's why you're
run
going to her. So yes, ovulation is so then that's right. So you know you're ovulating. You are right. Now not everybody will be as in tune or be as aware of it. So what we would do is we roughly know that if, for the purposes of this, we pretend that every woman has a 28-day cycle.
Okay. Yeah.
And that she ovulates bang on day 14. It won't always be like that, and it's okay, as long as it's not too far away from that. So basically you would start producing a little bit of estrogenic fertile mucus maybe around day 9-10. It's not very noticeable, and it just may feel a little bit different when you wipe after you pee. And then so we might have that day 9, 10, 11, and then day 12, 13, 14, that's when you get the more abundant, and definitely it's noticeable. And if you wipe on the toilet roll, it'll be on the toilet roll, or there's no mistaking it. We've all, and it's like egg white. We've all had that. We know what that is. And then that tells you, that's a very strong physical sign that there's an egg about to be released or has just been released. Other people might get a feeling like a little bit of pain, but not a pain where you need painkillers or anything like that.
Just a bit of discomfort.
Just a bit of I can feel something sharp happening. So that's another indication. Outside of that, it's when you have more energy. It's when the men flock around you more often. It's when you look in the mirror and you're actually happy with what you see looking back at you.
You feel more attractive in yourself.
You just feel more
pure buck.
That's it.
Yes.
And you're like,
I'm on fire today. Right?
But that is exactly it. You'll also be chasing the men. Because your libido will be up. Because you are literally saying, I have an egg on the way, I need a man.
Okay.
To impregnate me.
You're gonna get it.
Yeah, imagine like just walking about in a closet. Listen, I'm
pop the leg
ovulating
out.
this weekend. You're in for it. Yeah.
Whereas, as you've already said, 2 weeks later, when you're about to bleed, you just don't have that same
Zing.
Yeah. And the men don't notice you maybe just as much. And you look in the mirror and you go, what am I doing wrong? Where am I going wrong?
Like a bag of shite today.
Yeah.
Those days.
Where's the chocolate?
Yes.
I need more food. I need to slow down. And then in a more practical sense, what is happening then is like, say, so you have somebody that goes to the gym or they run, and so around their time of ovulation, they're lifting the heavier stuff. You can tell I don't do it, or I don't have the right
But more
lingo.
of a spring in their step. Yeah.
That's it. Or they're running faster and they've got their personal best and they're on fire and they're really proud of themselves. And then like the following week or 10 days later, they're not just quite where they were the week before. But what does a woman do? Only beat herself up. We're really good at that.
Yes,
so she's like, why am I not? And why did I? And how come?
Why am I? Don't I want to go for a run? I promised my
Yeah, and then they're thinking, oh, I've eaten far too much today because I was doing all the healthy eating 2 weeks ago and I had no chocolate cravings or anything, and now it's like I'm having it all, and they're giving themselves a hard time because they don't realize that they're going with the flow of their body, or rather they're not going with the flow of their body. When we have estrogen, we are stronger, we are faster, we are more confident. And that, if a woman knows that, then she can capitalize on that. And that's when you would have you're more creative. And that's when you would have your, that's when you might have your good ideas,
Yeah.
or it might be when you would have a schedule a meeting to put yourself out there, to get attention and everything. And
I'm outraged that I don't know.
I know.
Why would we not taught this in school? And how
Yeah.
capitalise on all this?
Well, you would think somebody didn't want us to know. What do they do? Shut them down, give them the pill. So, and then the next thing is you know that, you know, the week before your period that things are going to slow down a little bit. So you make less plans. You book a massage that week.
Yeah, like self-care week.
Yeah,
it should be.
it would be a good time for reorganizing, or, you know, doing a bit of admin, or, you know, that
Like
kind of thing.
low-key
Yeah,
stuff,
low-key
yeah.
kind of stuff that we put off. And like, as you said, Kate, just knowing that and having that information. And I always say, I want the women to have that information, and they can either use
then
it,
decide.
or they can say, no, give me all the hormones. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, but it's just about, you know, again, this is what this is all about, is educating people that you don't just go to your GP. There's so much more out there to educate, to learn about ourselves and understand our bodies. So then on to the, right, okay, I'm crippled. I'm not on the pill and I'm crippled with my period every month.
Okay, so first things first, like I always do say that you have to go and see your GP, and mention it to them, and ask, you know, what's it for. And it depends how crippled people are. There are people that are bedbound for 3 days, and vomiting and fainting, and that they must go to their doctor. And I would say don't leave until you get a referral to a gynae.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have that level of extreme.
I think it really, even that one point, it's like, you shouldn't be in bed every month. You shouldn't be crippled. That's saying...
Like, why do we think it's okay? Like, why?
Like, people, you girls do, you just go, oh, I'm always sick up with my period, so I've always been like that, so I'll just put up with it every month and move on. And it was really, from me, going to Maria, she's like, you don't have to be like that. Like, there's stuff that we can do to help you. I was like, oh, really?
Like, if you had that much pain in your head or your back,
or anywhere,
you know, people would say, oh no, that's not normal, go to a doctor about that. But because it's her period, it's all right. And I have women come to me and go, I'm like, do you have any period pain? Not really, no. And then I'm like, okay, well, do you need to take painkillers? Oh yes, now for the first 2 days I'd be taking painkillers throughout the day. And I'm going, oh no, well that is... And then they
realise that that's not normal.
But in typical woman fashion, I know, but I have friends that have it much worse than that. But I go, well, you know, doesn't matter. I want you getting a shock when your period arrives.
Yes.
And so what I would do, obviously the Chinese medicine is first and foremost a lifestyle medicine, which would be about movement with their Qigong or Tai Chi, their breath work, and their food. That's a whole other topic. The way they look at food is very different how we look at it.
Well, I got shouted at the first time I went to see Maria.
What happened? What did you do?
I had wet hair.
Oh yes.
Is that bad?
I had just kind of jumped out of the shower, as I do all summer, every summer, and just kind of brushed it, flung it up into a ponytail. She went, you don't come to me with wet hair. I was like,
why?
No.
What?
Well, you know what? Remember all the old wives' tales, kind of like, or the things our grandmothers would have said, like tuck your vest in, or dry your hair. Don't let don't go to bed with wet hair, and keep your feet warm. Like, it turns out that there was a lot of sense in that, and that would actually, that's a big part of Chinese medicine, keeping your feet warm.
Yeah.
And
keep your head warm then.
Your head. Well, it's just the cold and the damp. So cold and damp, the cold just causes things to stagnate. It slows down the movement of blood.
Okay.
And the cold would always have been considered an evil. You have to remember this was worked out thousands of years ago, and they would have had things like wind evil, because they knew when there was cold and there was wind up, then people were getting sick. So they decided that the pathogens were carried in wind, and then it was making people sick. But now that we've moved on a bit more, we do realise that's why we're wearing masks and everything now. So they weren't too far wrong with what they were saying. So anyway, back to what I do. I always try to educate women. It's a really big part of what I believe in. And nothing makes me happier when somebody sends me a message on Instagram saying, I've done your healthy tips and I had really bad periods and now they're so much better. Or I used to have really, I had bowel problems, or I had bloated and now I'm loads better just from...
So these tips that you've shared on Instagram then?
Yeah, I shared them on Instagram. And then I just was sharing. It was coming up to January, and Kate, you know what it's like. It's buy this miracle tea and buy this miracle. Sign up to this program, and it's all loads of money, and it's just, you know. I'm like, know what? I'm going to put out the tips. I'll put out one a day, and people can take them on board. Well, they just were so popular. And one of the things was, I was like, it's the skinny tea, and it is where you drink ginger, fresh root ginger, a few slices in the morning, pour hot water on top, wait till it cools, let it brew for a little while, and then you sip on that. And then the other half of it was to have fresh mint tea in the evening. And people were all taking it on board, and the feedback was just unbelievable about it. Amazing. So then I put all the tips together just this January and put them in a little ebook, and then people have downloaded it and they have all the little tips together along with like a little doodle grid which has a little doodle for each tip.